And we are live. And welcome to this LinkedIn Live that is hosted by MIT Sloan Executive Education. And I am here. I'm Stephanie Warner, Principal Research Scientist and Director of MIT CISR, the Center for Information Systems Research. And I'm here with my colleague, Howard Yu, at IMD Switzerland. And we're here to talk about our Future Ready Enterprise Academy. And so I'm going to turn it over to Howard and let him introduce himself. You're on mute, Howard. I don't know what happened.
I'm so excited to meet all of you. And Stephanie, we're going to have so much fun, not just talking about the Future Ready Academy, but more important is to give people some food for thought, thinking about how to get their business as well as themselves to become future ready. So I am Howard Yu. I based in Switzerland, IMD, and I'm also the Lego Professor of Management and Innovation. And so I run the Center for Future Readiness out in Switzerland, looking across 7 different industries and 300 companies in understanding what makes an organization future ready. But Stephanie, before I even start thinking about future readiness, you have been a true trailblazer in thinking about future ready. You've got to tell our audience, how did you come into this stream of research, but more importantly, the kind of research center that you're leading right now these days at MIT?
Oh, okay. Well, let me start with the Research Center. So the Research Center is the Center for Information Systems Research. We've been around, I believe, now for 51 years, and we study how companies use technology, information technology, digital technologies, and now artificial intelligence to really create a successful competitive advantage. We often have what I think of as large, big old companies that have been around for a while, and they've been successful and want to remain successful for the next 50 to 100 years. I got started on this research because my colleague Peter Weil and I did a book on business models and what were the digital business models that companies were going to adopt to be future, to be successful in the digital economy. And we've been talking about digital business models for a while, and then finally we had a CEO came to us and said, "Okay, well, this is great, but how do you get there?" It's like, how do you get there? And that started kind of the research on what does it take to get to one of these business models and have one of these business models really operate at the highest level. And we decided to call that future ready. And so you can have a future ready business model. And with that, you're often running on a research track. So, and how did you get started on your research?
Oh, I remember after my graduation from Harvard Business School at the time, I was still examining disruptive innovation because back then that's the key terminology. And so at first, I was still obsessed about the IT sector. But ever since I joined IMD in Europe, then of course, you've got a lot of industrial-based
Oh,
company like Schneider Electric or Novartis, Novo Nordisk of the world. And that really created a shock in my system because as much as I believe software eats the world, well, physical companies still have a lot of need for transformation and they can create disproportionate impact. So 5 years ago, I decided to use the Lego endowment to really do research, understanding what makes company have stamina, staying on top of competition over the long run. So it's sort of like the hero to zero compared to good to great. So that's the kind of work that I do. Stephanie, I want to ask you a quick question to getting into today's agenda as well,
sure.
because today we're going to talk about the Future Ready Enterprise Academy, the program that people kind of going through 2 modules that they would spend some time in Asia, but also spend very strong and huge amount of time at Sloan Management in Boston as well. Clearly, this is an innovation cluster. But if our listener would like to know how to make their organization future ready after listening to this webinar, that colleagues ask them, hey, so what kind of area I should really pay attention to? If we were to give them a, a short preview, how do they even think about becoming future ready, given the work that they do? Are there pathways that we could think about? Or what is the first step? How do we approach this big issue?
So I'm going to start with that if your leadership and your board are not on, if they're not ready to participate, it's going to be very hard for the whole entire organization to become future ready. So I think number one, you've got to have leadership on board and ready to begin this journey. Second is you want to develop a common language so you're all focused on the same thing and you're talking about it in the same way. And then I think from there, you would look at what is the pathway that you want to take. When we talk about becoming future ready, we talk about firms that are focusing and doing both excellent customer experience and excellent operational efficiency. So they're both innovating on one hand and taking out costs on the other. And that's why it's so hard to become future ready, because you're really doing two things. It's kind of like, remember that trick where you have to pat your head and rub your stomach? And
Yes.
that's what leaders are being asked to do. And so we want then for them to think about what's the pathway that they're going to be on. Are they going to focus first on operational efficiency and then move toward customer experience? Are they going to do customer experience initiatives first to engage the customers and then tie in and re-platform? Or are they going to take steps along the way, first operational efficiency, then customer experience? Or are they going to look at the landscape and say, oh, we need a new business unit? And then if you need a new business unit, you have to decide, well, is it, what are we going to do with it? Is it going to remain separate? Are we going to try to integrate, or are we going to spin it off? And so those are that's the way I start thinking about it. Leadership,
Wow.
common language, and now let's decide on the pathway. And how do you think about it?
I love the way you describe about the common language and common framework by leadership, and very much so, because in my work, I observe that future-ready company, if people ask me and press me to give them a bumper sticker, it's very similar to what you said. I call it perform and transform at the same time. It's like what you just said, patting your head and rubbing your stomach, right? It's like company must deliver the near-term result. Otherwise, they don't have the right to even try the next round.
Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, if we keep on delaying scaling up new capabilities, then we know, at some point we are mortgaging our future out. So it does comes down to organization must be able to scale up new capabilities with few clear priorities. And I think this is it. Oftentimes we see, even at the senior team level, that common understanding on what are the few key priorities we must focusing on is lacking. It's very easy to add another initiatives, but focusing on just a few things,
Mm-hmm.
despite the economic cycle going up and down, is so hard.
It,
It's so hard.
and look at the environment. The environment is just so rapidly changing. It's in talking to our sponsors, I find that things come out and they're like, well, what are we going to do with AI? What does it mean? And I think that's probably one of the big capabilities that companies are going to have to go and develop. But this is a hard job to go and transform that organization. So in the program that we're putting together, we're going to be talking about future ready. We're going to be talking about your work on, what does it take? What are some of the most important things that you found in your work that leadership has to do to transform the organization?
That's right. And actually, for people who would going through this program, what we tended to do is to bring your challenge into the program. Because in the end, what makes a program valuable is to make yourself, not just your business, but yourself to be future ready leader as well. And the greatest way is to show tangible impact to your immediate surrounding. So in a program, we would have a methodologies to bring to onboarding you so that you bring the critical challenge you see that you must fulfill in order to perform and transform. Then in the very first module, we'll give you framework. Then in between, you continue to refine that strategic narratives that you would have. The nice thing is you're going to meet people from around the world, not just from your own industry, which you get in your day-to-day environment.
Mhm.
But here is so special. You're going to forge friendship with adjacent ecosystem players. Just think about that, right? Say you are a steel maker. You're going to meet potentially an automaker on the side, or mining company on the other side, and utility organization. And that broadening the perspective is not just helpful for your business. I think this is really lifetime friendship that your own little kitchen cabinet, if you will. So the program design, as you can see on the comment, that you could click and take a quick look, and you would bring your challenge. We would give you framework. It's going to be very experiential. When you're in
Yep.
Boston, you're going to get exposed to the industry and the innovation cluster, which Stephanie momentarily would illustrate what you're going to see and why Boston is such an important cluster these days. But also, we're going to go to Asia in Singapore to
Yep.
understand that speed and agility and the whole ecosystem. How does it contrast compared to the deep tech, sign based US Boston cluster? We're going to see and broaden our perspective along the way.
And then we're going to bring the best of both together in this program. And really give all the participants different ways of thinking and approaching the problems that they have in their company and in their industry. But yes, the Kendall Square is it's an innovation hub, huge. When you come right now, I'm just agog at how much construction is happening, what kind of companies are coming into that square mile around Kendall Square, and then how those companies are interacting with each other. And we're really excited about showing the kinds of companies, the kinds of activities, the kinds of interactions that are taking place. It's a very exciting area with lots and lots of startup, but I bet you have the same thing there in Singapore. You're on mute.
What is really interesting and fascinating between Singapore and also Kendall Square is this idea you get to see both innovative startup but also large established organizations successfully transform themselves.
Yes.
So at MIT, obviously, that cluster are so full of life science company.
Yes.
All these big pharmaceutical companies are all there and they interact so closely with startup. Same thing as Singapore. Singapore, you have, a bunch of regional startup companies like Grab, which is like Uber equivalent in Asia. But you also see traditional organization from almost like a state-owned bank today to become the number one digital bank. And Stephanie, you know more than I do. That's
about DBS, right? Yeah.
That's right.
DBS Bank, what a transformation. We've studied it for many, many years. And so I'm hoping that should be part of the Singapore piece of the program. And I think that what a company like DBS Bank shows is both the vision that you need, the discipline that's needed, but also the creativity that you need to really take a company to become future ready.
That's right. And sort of like I saw DBS over time, that transformation really require long-term perspective
Yes.
with short-term right tactical trade-off. And I think this is almost like, yes, both end, right? We're excellent in tactical trade-off, but also we keep that long-term vision in hand. And it's almost like DBS is one of these examples that you go slow in order to go fast. The
Exactly.
CEO have spent so much time to getting to the organization to be agile. And we're talking about hardcore organizational design, modularity, API interface, simplification, standardization, which of course, Stephanie will give you the whole playbook in the program so
Absolutely.
that you are not going to leave our programs just thinking, oh, here's a great idea, but I have no idea how to execute. No, no, no. You're going to get a playbook customized for your own challenge so that from day one, when you have back, you have something to show and discuss with your colleague and generate that momentum. But Stephanie, maybe we could pivot a little bit because this is a question I get asked a lot of the time.
Okay.
People think like, oh, it's so easy to start something, but it's very hard to say no to things. And in my mind, this is complexity explosion. You have
Oh,
to make things simple in order to be agile. Can you tell us and share with us a little bit, maybe an example client that you've been working on? How do they approach simplification, or how can they avoid complexity explosion?
so I think when you are talking about this, one is you're really going to be moving from a project orientation into more of a product or platform type of orientation. And so, what we're seeing with all of the best companies, the ones that have really become future ready, is that they focus on the platforms. They figure out what it is that they do best and they build platforms around them. And we really first started to get that idea while studying DBS because they really made early on this decision that they were going to move from projects to platforms and started thinking about platforms in different ways. Were the platforms going to be enabling? So, for instance, those are going to be some of your big tech platforms around cybersecurity, the ones that you have to have in place to go and protect the organization to make it run faster. If network would be one of those. And then you're going to have some supportive types of platforms where you're going to have HR, you're going to have finance. And then you get to some of the really important platforms around, say, data and how does and APIs. How are you going to connect parts of the organization? And then you have some customer facing platforms. Now, every organization is going to have a different set of platforms, but you have to figure out what are those capabilities that are going to be used by all parts of the organization. And you talked about modularity, and where modularity and components become really important is you don't want to just create the module once. You want to reuse it over and over again so that you actually free up budget to do more of that transform that you talk about,
Yeah.
and then become more efficient at the perform. And so there's this piece around when you talk about first you have to simplify and then you can go fast. There's this hard part, before that where he's like, oh, let's figure out complexity. What do we have that's legacy? What can we just leave alone for a while? What really needs to be put into place? What are some of the platforms that we have to have?
This is such an important call out because oftentimes people felt like, oh my God, simplification is like boiling the ocean. I'm going to, simplify everything everywhere. I'm going to
No.
document everything everywhere. But what you describe is, no, you don't. You take small bit by bit, with a long-term view to buy yourself time. And you could also show immediate impact as well to sustain that investment cycle.
Yes, and we did some research early on where we were talking about, when do you start to see some measurable, tangible, and it was on average in our survey that we did, it was 21 months. And so I do want to lay that out there that you will start to see tangible, maybe not right away, but
Mhm.
certainly early on in the transformation. Your transformation is nowhere near done at 21 months, but you start to see those kinds of results, and then you can start to build on them. And I think what's important about that is it's also applicable to, say, some of the work that we're seeing being done in companies right now with AI, that
Right.
it's this part of your transformation to expect immediate results, especially in these big, complex companies, is probably overly optimistic. But you can start to see things within a reasonable time frame and then build on them.
I like that so much because as much as AI are really quickening the pace, oftentimes I see organization getting trapped to just chasing after the next most shiny object, and then they lose their plot. Typical example is like we're gonna pour in AI capability just to optimize the individual task within a silo, and no one really thinks systematically across the enterprise so that to re-architecture the entire workflow, because it is about elimination of things that shouldn't happen already rather than automating stuff that shouldn't be done from the first place.
Absolutely. And when we're doing some of the work that MIT Scissor has done on this, sometimes it's a multi-step approach. I mean, one of the
Mhm.
companies that we've been studying is Guardian Life, and what's interesting about the way that they're approaching, and I would say that this is now AI being put in their transformation, is that, as you said, it's not just about those individual, what I call a productivity shave. I can do my email 30
Right.
minutes faster.
Right.
It's more about, they see that as kind of necessary and getting their people used to using new technologies. But if you're really going to make a difference, it's an organizational change, it's a transformation. And the way that they're seeing the biggest pieces are around prioritizing projects that are gonna that have big changes possible. Like they've got one in terms of addressing RFPs,
Mm.
where it used to take 5 to 6 days to address, to get a request for proposal out,
Right.
and they've gotten it down to 24 hours now.
24 hours.
And they think that they
Wow.
can get it down even faster. They're using
Mm.
different kinds of AI to go and get this down faster. But what they next want to do is they've taken the standard proposal and they've worked on getting it faster. Now what they want to do is re-architect and rethink, can we do it differently? And
Right.
so there are these two pieces: is maybe we'll do it faster, but then we have to do it differently. You're really going to get the value when you go think about different. I see we have some questions.
Oh yeah, let's take some question here. So there is, let us call out. So there is this idea. How do you define a truly future-ready enterprise, and how is that definition changing as AI becomes more deeply embedded in the organization? Hmm. So is there any movement or changes?
So I'm not sure that I would. What I might change. So when I talk about taking out costs and innovating, there's this piece around data that I think in our initial description of what a future ready enterprise is, and tell me if you think this resonates with the work that you do, that
Yeah.
the data piece kind of was underneath it all. I
Mm-hmm.
think it becomes really important as AI comes more to the forefront. You really have to be thinking about getting your data um, in shape. You've got to have platforms so that you can share it, and you're going to have some skills too. But I think what AI does is really brings the role of data up to the forefront. Does your vision of future ready change?
Um, I think I would argue very similarly in the sense that with because most of us are not tech company, right? So you don't need to worry about building up the next LLM? I mean, this is not your business if you're Schneider
No,
Electric or Honeywell.
no,
But
no,
what
no.
is inexcusable for operating company or a bank in general, right? They've got to figure out what are the type of data mode that would continue to protect you when the LLM become commoditized. So it's
Yeah,
almost like I was thinking about even a bookstore, right? If you run a mom and pop bookstore, what you want is to understand even customer flow. It's not just online behavior, but when people walking into it, where is the heat map of your bookstore? What is the inquiry the customer generating from desire all the way to the final conversion? Because
hmm
those customer data become your enormous important competitive advantage
that
when
is
everyone can ask OpenAI something.
absolutely yes. We're finding that struggling to figure out what's the right data. And that's another piece where you talked about boiling the ocean is you're not going to get all of the data. You've got to pick the most important data. We think about it at Scissor in terms of what are your crown jewels? What is it that you're best at? You talked about Schneider Electric, and they built their EcoStructure platform, and so they coupled kind of a vision with also again like DBS with real discipline to go and make that vision come to life. And they don't need all of the data. You need to have data at the edge. You need to have the ability to go and transform it with software and to get insights, but it doesn't have to be everything.
Yeah. Oh, here is another question. Very specifically on the pedagogy. What role do site visits in Boston Kendall Square and Asia Innovation Hub played in translating classroom framework into actionable insights? Maybe I can take the one in Asia, and Stephanie, you deal with the one in Kendall Square.
Absolutely. Why don't you take the one in Asia?
Okay. So one part is seeing is believing. So that's one, because there is certain energy, like when it comes down to fast speed and being brave, that you kind of need to see Asia enterprise out there competing in Southeast Asia in this case. How do they try things with a bold vision and very quickly really pivot and having difficult conversation to shut things down? And this is where we want to bring that agility at scale to really make it almost like an enlivened experience. But more importantly, also, is to understand this is the data understanding most Western company would go for in a completely different ecosystem. How does it getting expressed? And having that multipolar perspective and viewpoint these days, given the strategic rivalry across the world, is very important. Because in the end of the day, if you're a Fortune 500 company, you cannot afford to pick side. Politician pick side. If you're Nike, if you're Starbucks, oh boy, you just need to win around the world. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. So, is this idea how do we pick the best in Asia, despite you may not be operating there, and selectively translate into a strategic roadmap for your company so that you could leapfrog other organization? That is our ambition. And of course, the role of Stephanie and I is not just to send you through the wild goose chase, but having framework.
Yeah.
The 4 different paths to digital readiness, or how do you perform and transform with a clear priority, give you concrete framework so that when we go site visit in Singapore, looking at Xiaomi from China, all the way to DBS locally reinvention, and grab fintech, kind of Uber equivalent, and now become fintech equivalent in the region. Then you could start to translate those aspirations to tackle with what we said earlier, your individual strategic challenges.
Yeah, and what we're going to be doing similar things at MIT, and I think of these site visits in a couple of ways. One is what's the art of the possible? You want to see what other companies have done. And so there's going to be startups, there's going to be bigger. I will say the innovation hub with the startups, you're going to see people using data in very different ways. You're going to see people thinking about problems in very different ways. Let's transform customer experience, or let's talk about automation in ways that you may not have thought about. I have done some work with boards where they will often go to visit other companies. And part of that is to see, how does a digitally native company, how do they act? What's their culture? What are some of those pieces of a digital culture that we should be thinking about bringing into our organization?
Yeah.
And also looking at how companies are dealing with that clock speed. How fast are things getting done? And then what is it, because they're prioritizing. And
Yes.
that's where you're talking about, oh, we have one more thing to do. It's like, you better figure out what's the most important thing to do, and what is it that can just be left alone. And so you'll see when you talk about these companies that you'll be visiting, again, you're going to have some larger ones, but then these smaller ones the startups are all about just new visions of what organizations, what enterprises can do, that I think that large companies might be far away from. I mean, when you visit these companies in situ, you see what they're dealing with. And the other piece of this is the work that we've done with boards, that Peter and I have done with boards, really emphasize the need to become more digitally savvy, the need to become more AI savvy. And I think that this is an important part of the education for you as a leader, is to figure out how do these things fit into an enterprise? How do they operate at enterprise scale? Not just, I can use my phone better, but what's the organizational, the enterprise view of it? And then finally, you need to be talking to companies that are doing things that could disrupt you, because you need to be thinking about balancing project risk and business model risk. Sometimes you have to take that risk.
That's right. That's right. And one of the key question also pop right out in the chat is people ask like, so what type of executive would get disproportional benefit out of this program? Is essentially asking, oh, what type of audience should they consider? So I'll take a shot, and Stephanie, you could add on as well, because what I've seen is there are two types of people. One is obviously if you're board members or CEO, for sure, your mandate is to keep the enterprise future ready, no doubt. But what I also see a lot of the time is a manager that going through from almost like a specialist function, and they getting into more generalist, general manager responsible for P&L, because those roles essentially you need to lead a future ready business.
Well, you're a
So
mini CEO.
yes, exactly. Which is, I always thought those levels have the toughest job.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The pressure from the board. You need to deliver the short-term earning, but at the same time, the board also picking, wait, who is forward-looking enough to groom them to become the C-suite succession plan as well. So it's almost like you said, right? Touching the head and rubbing the stomach at the same time. And so I think people who have an ambition to move up to become, taking larger responsibility, that ability, that criticality of thinking outside your own swim lane, keeping an eye open what is going on, so that you can build a business, not just deliver the near-term result your board is mandated, but you could also tell a story and show key performance and early evidence that the business that you're building on is also future proof. So I would say these two elements really work well together.
Yeah, I think that you're right there, that this is a great program for people that are entering where they have some P&L responsibility and authority, and are building a business. And so I think that that's right. I think the other thing that they're going to get from this is both a broad strategic view, I think
Yeah.
they're going to get experience in seeing innovation hubs, both the speed and the innovation that's happening in Asia, and then also kind of some of the new and interesting technologies that you'll see happening around, being developed around MIT. But besides the strategic frameworks, there are also going to be kind of some tactical pieces, some things that you're going to be able to take right away and use immediately in your organization. So what we're hoping comes out of this is that we've designed it so that there is a week in Singapore and a week at MIT, and there's time in between. And what we're hoping is that the participants in this program use that time in between to start to develop roadmaps for where they're taking their piece of the organization. And then when they come back to MIT, that we can stress test it, we can see, are there pieces that should be added? And what we're really planning for is that we will be responsive to those kinds of projects that are being developed in the time in between.
That's right. That's right. And here is a question also being raised. And I think it is, when I read the question, I can feel the emotion underneath as well. So here's the question.
Okay.
It's almost like, with the rapid pace of generative AI, what advice do you give to leaders who feel they're already behind?
So, are they? I don't know that they're behind yet. So, I think when we've done research at MIT CISR on your enterprise AI maturity, we identified 4 stages. And the 4 stages are around educating and preparing your people and starting to set in place some guardrails around how data is going to be used. I would say lots and lots of companies are there. The second stage is around building pilots and capabilities. And the third stage is around scaling. And then the fourth stage is becoming AI future ready. There are fewer companies in the fourth stage, but I think where it's really important and where leaders should not get bogged down in thinking that they are behind, but they should really be thinking about, how do we take those pilots? How do we take some of these early capabilities, and how do we strengthen those capabilities, and how do we determine which of those pilots are the right ones and then scale them? Because when the research that we've done shows that the biggest financial impact, the biggest impact that you'll see is moving from stage 2 to stage 3. So I think that if a company says, oh, it's stage 4 and we're just nowhere close to being AI future ready, I think that's okay. I think what you should focus on is making sure that, one, you know how to prioritize those projects. Do you have a strategy in place to prioritize? Do you have your systems in place? So remember, we talked about that complexity. How do you start to make sure that you deal with that complexity? Do you have the right people in place? Do you have the right roles? And then do you govern it well? And so if you can start to make that move from stage 2 to stage 3, I do not think that you are behind. I think that if you stayed in stage 2 and all you had was, we're letting 1,000 flowers bloom, I think then you should worry about it. But just you're not AI future ready, I would reframe it. And I would reframe to think about, it's really about fitting the strategy. How does this fit in? And what are those enterprise wide what are those enterprise wide initiatives that are really going to give us value?
I think this is so true because, and what you just said there, Stephanie, it also underscores why leadership matters and why in this program, of course, we cover strategy and digitization and AI, but you would also get exposed to other faculty, leadership faculty,
Yes.
like Kate Isaac from MIT, to really rethink about how do you need to lead in the age of AI and digital driven world. Because just like Stephanie, you just said, right? it's not okay to let thousands flower blooms forever. And in order to move forward, we need to be brave enough to shut down the pretty good to scale the truly great. So
Yes.
don't let a pet project to linger just because it ties to some personal ego with a senior vice president. So we are talking about organization transparency, decision making processes based on real world evidence. But last is, are we brave enough to admit failure without blame? Now that is obviously leadership heavy. And so because this program is to get the whole business future ready, what you're going to see is, of course, perspective of US, the West, the East, Singapore, but not just strategy and digital. That's Stephanie and I love so much, but also strong foundation on leadership too.
Absolutely. And, the work that Kate has done, and then some of the work that we have done at MIT Scissor, and we only touch on it, but when we have looked at our statistical research, changing from a command and control type of leader to one that we call more of a coach and communicate is so important in moving that transformation along. I mean, you really have to be able to communicate that vision and get people on board. And I think the companies that we've talked about, the DBSs, the Schneiders, the Honeywell, that leadership piece of communicating that vision and being consistent about communicating that vision, and then coaching your people, making sure they have the right kind of training so that they do move along, is really important. I see a question in the chat about
Yeah.
how do senior executives decide which pathway is most appropriate given their current capabilities?
$1 trillion question.
It really is. And it has to do partly with, I think that there's a culture piece to it where you are what feels most like fits in most with what you are able to do with your organization. Lots of manufacturing firms like a pathway that focuses first on operational excellence because that's what they know how to do best. And so there is a big cultural piece around this. You have to take into account the risks and the benefits. I think that if most companies were forced to choose, they might choose the pathway, that what I call pathway 3, where they alternate their focus. But if you're going to choose that pathway, you need to be able to govern very well. You're going to change your budgets, and you need to have control over that. You need to have a technology roadmap and know where you're going. And you need to have good processes in place to capture learnings. And sometimes so it's all going to depend on the organization. We've not seen any differences in pathways in terms of success. And sometimes you kind of you do something different. Like, for instance, if you think of the example of Cemex, a global building materials firm. And when they got a new CEO coming in, Fernando Gonzalez, he looked at the organization, the enterprise, and said, we're in decent shape. But if we transformed ourselves and created a great customer experience, that's a competitive advantage that, is really going to give us, years that we can then really build out. And so they actually decided to do a pathway 2, a focus on customer experience, which you don't normally think of cement and customer experience. But it was very successful. They built a digital platform, put those kinds of capabilities in the hands of the job site manager, and the adoption was so fast. And then they replatformed, they connected it all together, and now they have end-to-end data. They're able to do so much with that. And their NPS is 74. I mean, so sometimes you go against the grain and you do something different. But again, it's a vision that you have to have.
And what I like about this story, it does illustrate the sort of leading indicator required to make sure we are walking and making traction along the way, which is one of the questions being raised in the Q&A is like, what are the leading indicator, not financial indicator, that our AI initiative are yielding customer and ecosystem value, not just cost saving. But I think, Stephanie, you just name it, right? Depending on the stage you're in along the pathway, as a management team, as a business manager, as the general manager running the business, we've got to define what are the meaningful indicator that at your example is like at some point is the connected number of customer, the
Yeah.
kind of data capture we have, not monetization yet. Because if you try to monetize from day one, well, you're going to kill the ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, and think about the examples that we've talked about. So, for
Mm,
instance, on my end, you could think about Guardian, where early on, what they're looking at is we're going to make this faster so that and getting a proposal out faster. You could then think about, well, then do we have a faster turn? Do we have, uh, do we have, our brokers, are they happier, and are they coming back to us with more proposals? You can look at Schneider Electric early on in their transformation where they focused on cross-selling, and that's in part because they were so fragmented early on that cross-selling was kind of an indicator that they were starting to integrate. You can look at DBS Bank where they were looking at customer hours saved
yeah.
because they were focusing on customer experience. And so this metric, I think, is going to depend on what's the goal that you have there. And, probably thinking early, thinking about in the first couple of stages, what are the things that would show that you're making progress? And it may not be financial. It may be hours saved. It may be cross-selling. It may be something. It may be customer NPS score. And so there's not one size fits all.
That is so true. And so this is why the program, the way we architect it, is not just to show you, the Tesla of the world, the Google of the world. Of course, we will cover them. But throughout this discussion between Stephanie and I, we want to bring organization and company you can recognize as well. It's so easy these days. We just looking at a couple of software companies and declare, okay, you know it, here's the playbook. But what we try to do is no matter which industry you're in,
Mm-hmm.
energy, banking, finance, healthcare, life science, we
Utilities,
would
manufacturing, yes, pharma, yes.
we would meet you where you are. And this is the fun of it, because after all, this is not just a program itself, but it's lifetime learning, and hopefully, and you will forge deep friendship with your cohort. So depending on who is going to enroll, that we would see before you even arrive, looking at your industry background, so that we would emphasize element that you would find most critical for you. And this is our mission.
Absolutely. And, we really believe in using exemplars and case studies that are going to really show you, again, what's the art of the possible. And that's what those site visits are going to do too. I think that we want to, we've had a great time here, Howard, but let's finish up with some details about the program, the Future Ready Enterprise Academy. Module 1, the first week is February 3rd through 7th. 2026 in Singapore. And I think that's Howard and Mark are going to be there, and it will be very exciting. And then Module 2 is April 27th through May 1st, 2026 here in Cambridge, Mass. And I think all 4 of us are going to be here.
Correct. Because what you see, this is not a program that you do stuff in IMD Singapore and do stuff just at MIT Boston. Is in fact 2 sides of the faculty we really come together. You could feel it now. And so on both modules, you're going to see faculty from both schools coming together, holding your hand, and we won't leave you. We'll see you in module 2 again. And in between, we'll give you a framework so that you could work through your strategic challenges as well and ambition. So that would be a quite a special program, honestly speaking.
I think so. We're very excited about it. And we want to thank you for being here with us. And if you have any questions, reach out to Exec Ed at MIT Sloan, or at IMD, reach out to Howard and me. We're on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to us personally on our email. Thank
That's
you for
right. And
watching.
we would send you follow up so that you could just one click and ask us anything. So you would see a follow up communication for your convenience.
Sounds great. Thank you, Howard. It was great to see
It's
you in
so much
person.
fun. Thank you. All right. See you all very soon. Bye bye.
Bye bye.